Hi, I'm Dr. Harold Shinitzky, psychologist specializing in sports psychology and author of Me, Myself, and I, a Narcissist Mindset. And you're listening to Sam Brief on the Mental Game Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mental Game Podcast. Sam Brief with you here in my sunny studio in Chicago. I'm recording this the first weekend of March. No, I'm not. What am I talking about? It's the first weekend of October. Clearly my timing is off, although I was just having a conversation with someone about how the two best sports months are March Madness, and October. Anyway, this is the Mental Game. You're here, I'm here, and I'm so excited to welcome a guest back to the podcast for a record-breaking third time. Dr. Harold Shinitzky. I keep looking down because I got his book in my hand. Author of Me, Myself, and I, a Narcissist's Mindset, Self-Help Handbook for Victim Survivors of a Narcissist. Now, those of you who listen to every episode, I appreciate you. You'll remember this name, Dr. Shinitzky, based in Florida. He's been a licensed practicing psychologist for 30 plus years, working with athletes in the Olympic space, NBA, NFL, NHL, junior levels, and everything in between. He's extremely smart. He's extremely kind and extremely well-spoken. You will learn from him. That's why I have him on the podcast. I'll let you listen to the man himself, Dr. Harold Shinitzky joined. We break down his book and what you can take from it. He's coming into the Mental Game in 3, 2, 1. And here he is for the third time on the Mental Game Podcast. It's Dr. Harold Shinitzky. Welcome back, Doc.
Thank you. I'm glad to be the first of doing a three-peat. I feel pretty honored.
That's going to be the next trophy on the trophy case above your head is the three-time participant on the Mental Game. And I know it'll mean a lot to you, right?
It does. It does. You are a phenomenal interviewer, reporter. I appreciate your wisdom and insight. Your dialogue style and interviewing makes me actually a very happy person to be on the program because it shares the information in a way that I think your listeners are going to benefit from it. So I value being on the show.
All right, that is it for the Mental Game. Dr. Shinitzky has complimented me enough, and I bid him adieu. No. I kid. But on a serious note, that does mean a lot to me. And you know, game recognizes game. There's a reason I keep inviting you back, and it's because you're very smart. You explain your concepts well, and you are so gracious and humble about your work. And on the note of your work, I'd love to get to your latest piece of work, which I just finished up devouring cover to cover, and it's your new book, Me, Myself, and I, a Narcissist's Mindset, a Self-Help Handbook for Victim Survivors of a Narcissist. Here it is. It's got a very lovely illustration on the cover, and it is by you, Dr. Shinitzky. So before we dive into it, I just want to know the inspiration behind it. Why did you put pen to paper on this book?
I appreciate the question. I have found that over the last several years that I have been working with, and my specialty is sports psychology, as many of your listeners have heard me in the past. The curious aspect, I've had a number of individuals come in to do some therapeutic focus on being the victim and surviving of a narcissistic relationship. And that was happening a bit more often in some pretty ugly situations. Then I started noticing it also in society, that there are more of these individuals in position of power. And that started to make me very concerned. And so I wanted to be able to write a book that specifically focuses on the narcissists, what are the warning signs of it, how dangerous they can be. And if you happen to be one of those who have been through a relationship with this type of individual, I wanted to write a book that helps empower and heal from this type of an individual or relationship so you can have a healthier future.
It strikes me that anyone who reads this can take something from it and apply it to their life. Maybe you are a narcissist and you need to come to a reckoning, and in this book, Dr. Shinitzky helps you through that. Maybe you're in a relationship with one. Maybe you know someone who is in a relationship with a narcissist. anyone can take something from this. I certainly did, and that's why I
Yeah.
appreciated it as a book, and that's why I'm having you on. Now,
Thank you.
I want to start with the title, Dr.
Yep.
Shinitzky, because the words that struck me the most were victims, survivors of a narcissist. Why is that sort of a compound phrase? Victims dash survivors.
Most people who go into a relationship with the goal of it working out. And so they're investing in a relationship. And that makes sense to the individual. The curious aspect is the person they're with, if they're with a narcissist, has a certain style of relationship where they don't care about the other individual as, a long-term partner. They only care about getting their needs met. So you have someone with a conscience who wants to make a relationship work, and you have someone who is conscienceless, who just has no interest in terms of mutuality and consideration, empathy, being able to be thoughtful and considerate. So you got one individual who's really invested in the relationship and is giving of themselves. They, unfortunately, are stunned when the other person can be hurtful, mean-spirited, belittling, trivializing them, verbally abusive, and occasionally physically abusive. And so this individual, one is trying to make it work, and the other one just wants their needs met. And so this individual will oftentimes suffer from the slings and arrows of this abusive, mean-spirited person, and they will sometimes have damage to their own ego, their identity, that they'll have a damage in terms of who they are, their own self-worth, their value. And it can be incredibly destructive in such a way that as they move forward then in life, they are the victim and a survivor of this horrible kind of individual who just only cares about themselves in a relationship.
We've all heard those stories or been through those stories.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, I just think about my own life. I've been in a successful, happy, amazing relationship for 10 years. So because of that, a lot of my friends will often lean on me for advice because they think I know everything, when in reality, I just got lucky. So I hear a lot. And, being a young person in today's climate of dating apps and social media and just the way the world is and how turbulent it can be, I hear some horror stories, man. I mean,
Unfortunately.
serious horror stories. And,
Yeah.
and what you say about those narcissistic relationships, really, I'm hearing it eats away at that victim survivor, which is why
Right.
it strikes me that term victim survivors is really accurate. It's
Yes.
really accurate. And
Yes.
I do, before we keep going, I want to make sure we get the definition of narcissist
Okay.
out there because,
Yeah.
and you outline this towards the beginning of the book, it's a long list. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of things in psychology. I mean, if anyone out there took a psychology class in college, like, you got to check this whole box, a bunch of boxes
Right.
to be of this definition, right? So narcissism is no different. Give me simple. Give me simple. What's a narcissist?
I'll hit upon these. By the way, in today's society, it's kind of trendy to call someone a narcissist when you may not agree with them or they may do something you don't like. So it may be overused and misused. So the definition would be very helpful for people to truly understand. And that is that someone has to satisfy at least 5 of these criteria. The first one is that the individual has a grandiose sense of self. They kind of exaggerate their accomplishments without the commensurate equal achievements. They lie about who they are. They are very braggadocious about it. There's a preoccupation with power, with beauty, with love. And so this consumes them. And oftentimes, and when we look at it in politics around the world, this is where dictators actually step in, because it's an ultimate power. In addition, most of these individuals have a sense of feeling special, and they're only understood by other people who are equally special. And so they only want to associate with individuals that they believe are of this status. They need excessive admiration, so they need the verbal statements of loyalty. Someone cannot question them. A loved one can't just express their own thought, because to the narcissist, who's really very thin-skinned, they can't deal with someone having a disagreement with them or a difference of opinion. They are so superficially shallow, they have to have absolute loyalty. Entitlement is another biggie where they just believe they should receive favorable treatment. Rules don't apply to them, laws don't apply to them, that they're above the fray of all of that. And that becomes pretty disgusting and hurtful in a relationship. Now, there's a few more, one of which I think is really important for your listeners to understand. A narcissist is also extremely exploitative. And so they go into a relationship and will oftentimes try to win over someone. And they know what the person needs. So they'll say anything to win the person over. But it's not to have this relationship for the other person. It's because the other person gives them something, offers them something. The narcissist gains something from it. And so they're exploiting the relationship for their own benefit. When they behave poorly, they have no empathy. They have no regard, no consideration how their behavior impacts somebody else. They believe everybody is envious of them, but in reality, they're envious of everyone else. And the last one, which is kind of they seem to be very arrogant and haughty, and they're always trying to be this kind of strutting peacock and try to be in the center in terms of the image because they have to, because internally they actually feel very inferior and insecure.
That final image, right? The arrogant, haughty, sucking from everyone else and not giving to everyone else. That's the narcissist. And I know you out there, the listener, you've seen this, right? You've seen it on TV. You've seen it in movies. You have seen it in your own life. You might see it in the mirror. And a little later on, we're going to apply it to the sports world because I know at core, the Mental Game is a sports podcast, and I really want to get Dr. Shinitzky's thoughts on applying this to sports. But we have to understand what it is generally, societally, and that's really helpful to hear those definitions. Now, I think about our society now, and social media, technology is a huge part of it. It is turned into the fabric of who we are, right? I go on my phone all the time. I check social media all the time. I want to do it less, but I do it a lot. And I don't do it as much as a lot of other people do. You write in here that social media and technology contribute to a rise in narcissism. How do those two go hand in hand?
Well, by the way, just as an FYI, before I forget, the research shows that about 75% of narcissists are men. Doesn't mean that women can't be, but in society, positions of power are oftentimes individuals who can become narcissists or who are narcissists and get into that. And so in the book, you'll hear a lot of male stories and examples, but female is also a reality and can be destructive in relationship. Technology, because of technology, we are in this phase of look at me. I post something and I feel it is so important that people have to look at me. So you see the whitewashing of one's life. It's not your true life. There's, as they say, there's nothing real about reality TV. Well, same with what is posted online. It is the best of what someone can post. It is not the process. It's not the hard effort. It's not the failures. It's usually the success. And when people post, I oftentimes have individuals who will come in and they will be upset because they got a dislike. They didn't get shared. Or worse, they got no response at all. And their entire person, their personhood, their identity is so devalued at this point. So it's dependent on this kind of feedback from the world. In addition, the anonymity, and this is the part that I think fuels the narcissist. You can get people who are these warriors online who are hurtful, mean-spirited, viscerally just abusive. But they're also seeing this from our positions, people in power. And so in social media or on different networks, they present this image as being normal and acceptable. So I think, unfortunately, technology is rewarding in some ways and is amplifying it in others.
Right. It creates this subculture that is not life, right? In life, you don't walk down the street looking, acting, behaving, just being your best 24/7. But that's what people put forward on social media.
Yeah.
I do that, right? I journalistically and as a broadcaster, I put my best professional foot forward on social media. If I post a picture from my personal life, well, damn right I'll be looking good, right? Damn right it'll be nice lighting, and I'll probably look like I'm having a nice time. That's human nature, and social media has made it so easy. So am I hearing from you that the existence of social media enables narcissism, or is it more that people who might not already be narcissistic are getting sucked into social media and it's turning them into narcissists?
Well, it is a personality disorder. So the
Right.
person has this and develops it and furthers it through life. Most people go through life at a very young age, and they learn the difference between good and bad, right and wrong at a very young age. And that all your decisions are based on that. And that's moral decision making. And I believe the majority of the people on the planet are that way. But then there's this other group of individuals who at a very young age, they don't follow the same good, bad, right, or wrong. They actually follow two different rules. And the first one is, what are the odds I'm going to get caught? And if I get caught, the second one is, how significant are the consequences that I should even care? And so these individuals are constantly violating mores and laws and rules and societal expectations. And they're just doing things for themselves. And I would say that if we can actually speak from a philosophical point of view, we all have, if you look at it on a continuum, we look at the world, everything I think, feel, say, and do makes sense to me. And so from a point of view of, there's a selfishness to my existence, and I can be compassionate and considerate. But, at one level, I have my favorite food and my favorite teams and things of that nature. It's moving along the continuum, and online, it allows the development of this. I think that's one of the reasons why, as we say, we've kind of lost the ability to be civil in civilization. I always talk about how you can disagree, but just don't be disagreeable. And the internet allows us to kind of destroy those two principles right there. And so I'm trying to get this information out there that I believe the majority of people follow the mores, the laws, the rules, are good people, they're centrists. But there are these extremists who the internet fuels this type of grandiosity and false bravado and mean-spirited, which is just destructive.
It's absolutely destructive, right? On so many levels. The internet makes it easier. And you have this great quote in your book, page 24. It's one of those quotes. I love when a quote is attributed to unknown.
Yeah.
That's my favorite author, is unknown. Those are the best quotes. When the quote is so good, it doesn't need to be by Shakespeare. It's not Churchill or Cicero or anything. No, it's unknown. And it's, you stabbed me 1,000 times and acted as if you were the one that was bleeding. Now, in real life, this doesn't really happen, right? No one we know is stabbing someone 1,000 times and acting like that they are the one bleeding. On social media, this happens, though, right?
Yeah.
This happens, and it happens at such a quick rate. I think as a society, and I hear it from you, we're struggling to keep up.
We are. We truly are. People in positions of power, interesting enough, and in dynamic relationships with a narcissist to someone who is a invested partner, they will behave in such an inappropriate, poor way that when they get challenged, they then take the victim role. And it is stunning. They literally create the problem that they now assume the victim role for. And so they're constantly trying to look how powerful I am or how right I am. But when something gets challenged, when there's a kink in the armor, they take the victim role. And it's woe is me. And they put then the blame on the person who is actually kind of just pointing out reality, that they behaved poorly. Just for your listeners, I want to point out there are 3 types of narcissists. There's 2 of them in one of the chapters and one that gets its own chapter. And So there's overt, covert, and malignant. Overt narcissists, we don't need to have a doctorate to be able to identify this person. To diagnose someone, you need a doctorate, but just to identify this is a bully in society. They actually have a sense of inferiority. They're very thin skins. They're probably if I use the term properly against them, they're probably the biggest snowflakes around, but they'll blame other people and claim other people are that. They put others down. They externalize. They don't do what healthy people do, which is healthy people set, work, and achieve a goal, and so that person feels better. Well, the narcissist, when someone else does well, they get a feeling of inferiority, so they have to publicly humiliate, belittle, name call, just so they can have a dynamic experience of being superior. They get joy out of hurting someone, and it's in a public forum. The covert narcissist is a wolf in sheep's clothing. They look to society like everything's good and fine and nice and helpful, and they'll be there. If you need money, they got it for you. If you need networking, they'll connect you. But in their own loving relationship, they're horribly belittling, mean-spirited. They will use anything against their loved one. So if their loved one shares some personal challenges, that will be used against them. They do not fight fair. And so they give this double standard, one when how they appear in society, and then one how they are in their relationship. And then the malignant narcissist is a morbid individual. That's the conscienceless individual. They will exploit humans. They see people as lesser humans. So they derive pleasure from seeing other people suffer. And there's a word that I mentioned in there that's called Schadenfreude. It's a German word that we here in the States have converted slightly. It's in the definition, where you derive pleasure from someone else's suffering. And they don't look at people as people, but means to their own end to get their needs met. But I'm telling you, these people are vengeful. They are horrible, because if they ever lose the power in a relationship, they can bring destruction to the other person. If they lose power, we see this with dictators around the world, they're willing to leave a scorched earth. If I can't be in power, then to heck with everybody. And that's kind of the impetus for me. I was getting a little bit scared that around the world we're seeing this, kind of strongman stance. But if they're the malignant narcissist, that is a scary future. Because they really don't have the best interest in others. They have their interest at heart.
Looking at human beings as means to an end, that ain't really how it's done. Now,
Right.
And a lot of what you're talking about makes me think of something I'm so glad that there was a clear definition of, in addition to Schadenfreude, which, by the way, the concept of Schadenfreude, I always think of Curb Your Enthusiasm and Larry David, one of the great shows of all time. He's not the poster child in that show, though, for how to live your life. So you definitely get some good old-fashioned narcissism on Curb, but
Yeah.
It's a great laugh. Anyway, I digress. You also define gaslighting,
Yeah.
which is something that in culture, in social media, in pop culture, among the younger generation, that's a term that's thrown around all the time. Sometimes it's used right, sometimes it's not used right. People are gaslighting left and right, though. I mean, the gaslighting rate is through the roof. So what is as a doctor, your definition of gaslighting, and how does it apply here?
If your listeners want for entertainment purposes, there's actually a movie called Gaslight, and it was done decades and decades and decades ago. And in essence, it was when gas was used to light your lights. And in the movie, the protagonist, the narcissist in this case, I should say, we don't know it at the time, is actually messing with the lights in the apartment where he and his girlfriend live. And as she was questioning, hey, you noticing the lights are going down? He's like, lights going down? What are you talking about? And the whole slow premise of crazy making. And that's what gaslighting is. It is a form of psychological abuse to your loved one, the person that you're in this partnership and relationship. The narcissist never accepts accountability. They can never be wrong. They can never be held accountable or being responsible. As a matter of fact, they do something called doubling down. That is, they'll do something wrong like lie or steal or cheat. And if you call them on it, they'll spin it into kind of a positive, as though somehow these morals and standards that we've lived by are wrong. And so they'll oftentimes externalize responsibility. They'll put the blame on the other one, on their spouse. So an individual in a relationship will question the narcissist, and the narcissist will deny and then reverse it to the other. And so an example of that in one of the relationships, the therapy that I had worked with, the husband and wife, the wife found a bank statement with her husband's name on it that she was unfamiliar with. And she thought, oh no, someone committed identity theft, or maybe the bank had an error. And so when her husband came home, she posed it to him like, hey, I noticed that there's this bank account that is open. Instead of having an adult conversation and looking into finding out, was someone stealing identity, etc., it would be a conversation and they would work together. So as it works out, instead of just having an adult conversation and looking into what this issue might be, he realizes he's caught in the middle of something, and he immediately turns it around on her. And instead of being able to say, let's try to resolve this like two grown adults, he eviscerates her. He starts ripping her to pieces. I can't believe you don't trust me. You think I'm a liar, that I have a dual life. The reality is he is all of those things. And for her, she now starts to question her own perception of reality. And gaslighting it is this turning it around, never accepting responsibility. And if there is blame, it's always thrusted upon, externalized onto the other person. And if it's in a loving relationship, it's usually the person who has a conscience, while the person who is conscienceless will rather, and I always like to say this, the narcissist prefers to argue without a solution rather than having an adult conversation and a dialogue to correct the problem.
And this is why definitions are so important. And this is why reading and being educated is so important.
Yes.
Because if you are a victim of a narcissistic relationship, or you know someone who is, if you know what gaslighting is, it suddenly becomes crystal clear, super easy to call out.
Yep.
If you don't, well, then you get sucked into having your perception of reality twisted, right?
Absolutely.
But if you know what it is,
yep,
you can call it out. And Dr. Shinitzky definitely helps you with that.
The first half of the book, for your listeners, the first half of the book goes through all of kind of what are the warning signs of a narcissist. So you can really be educated on that. The entire second half of the book are therapeutic recommendations that I would make to help empower the victim or survivor of this type of a relationship. And there's exercises one after another for each one of the points. And one of those points might be just important for everyone to hear right now. And I just want to share that. And that is the idea of a listening filter. Narcissists actually have a sense of inferiority. It's kind of like they're the wizard in the Wizard of Oz hiding behind the curtain. And if they're ever questioned, they will react poorly. And this is with gaslighting. But if you listen to what a narcissist is oftentimes externalizing and claiming to everyone else, oh, that they're lying and that's fake information. And whatever it is they're never wrong. If you listen to what they're accusing other people, it's really a projection of their own issues. So when they're saying you are the liar, it's actually not, I'm actually the liar. You're having some fake information. Well, that's because I tend to come up with fake information. If you listen with this filter that a narcissist is actually projecting when they're blaming, it's actually about themselves. It suddenly changes the dynamics and you see the person for who they are.
I want to make sure that we apply this to the sports world because you and I both work intimately in sports. Me as a media member, you as a sports psychologist of some of the best athletes in the world, some now Olympic medal winning athletes from the Paris Games. We see narcissists in sports at perhaps a higher rate than in any other industry. I want to start here, though, because I think sometimes in sports, it might be helpful to have a little bit of narcissism in you. Now, that might be misusing the definition. That might be using just the colloquial, oh, he's a narcissist, but I'm not using that checklist that you took me through at the beginning of this podcast. So what do you think of that, just as a statement? Like, you got to be a little narcissistic to be a stud athlete.
Again, it's a continuum. If you start your own business, there's a part of you that has to be confident enough to say, I can do this on my own. If you run for political office, I believe I can be making a difference. If I'm willing to push myself in sports, I believe I have this capability that I am actually better than other individuals. And so on the continuum, so I want to clarify something again, because there is the trendy way of looking at it, and then there's the diagnostic part of it. All narcissists are jerks, but not all jerks are narcissists.
Beauty. Print it on a t-shirt. Print it on a mug. Explain it.
Well, as it works out, I mean, like if somebody just doesn't do what you want, they're not being a narcissist. And, if someone gets upset and, if our emotions supersede our cognitions, we're at risk of saying or doing something we later regret. It doesn't make someone a narcissist. You heard those criteria at the beginning: exploitative, haughty, arrogant. Those are brutal. Someone might believe, and if I might say, someone may believe this in athletics because usually by the time they're in middle school, they are physically more skillful than their peer group. So in our society, we value that. And so in middle school, teachers may allow a child to kind of get away with a little bit more. Their peers, like hanging around with them because they're like, the person who gets all the attention. When they get to high school, I had a player that I was working with whose first class was PE, and he was 20 minutes late for class every day. And his teacher wanted to just be his friend. So one day when he made it big, he can say, I was a part of his development and it's all because of me. But I said to the athlete, I said, this is the worst lesson this guy is teaching you, that rules don't apply to you. You're special and you don't have to follow any of these things. He's literally feeding into the narcissism of the beast. And so laws, rules, they get corporations who, give them a little grace. Universities, they get millions of dollars because they get some of these stud athletes. And so our society actually helps raise people to be this. And you see this in other professions too. Some CEOs are this way. I worked with a couple of surgeons recently that were fine in society, but horrible at home. They were the covert narcissists and just terribly abusive. I have people in the military. Again, they are used to commanding, troops, but when they come home, wait a second, my kids don't behave the way I want them to, and my spouse thinks she's my equal. So yeah, we see this. And in sports, we oftentimes say that the narcissist on a team is like a cancer. They are literally destroying the fabric of a team. It is all about them. It is about their numbers. It is about them, their money. And I get it. In today's society, we are really pushing that, get all your money, get everything you can, whatever that is. There's no commitment, loyalty. There's no need to be concerned about the others. But that's dangerous for the integrity of a team if you really want to go far. And as they say, if you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. And I tend to say that we survive together, but you die alone. And the narcissist is destructive because their primary interest is always them. And on a team, I get pulled in, get asked to work with and consult with some of these individuals to help challenge them to understand they still need a team. to be triumphant.
I love that African proverb of, if you want to go far, go together.
Yep.
And if you want to go fast, go alone. Today, we see a lot of athletes trying to go fast, trying to get that first big contract extension fast, trying to get that first all-star selection fast, right? It's a go fast type of culture in sports, and that feeds into narcissism. Now, you feel free to not do this. I'll give you the option, but to name names, are there any obvious narcissists today in sports or in sports history that you think would be helpful to illustrate this?
Well, as an ethical provider, I cannot hypothesize about someone who I have not assessed or intervened on, nor can I then declare if I had intervened on them. So I appreciate that. What I tend to say when I'm asked this question is, as you've gone through the interview and your listeners hear this, they probably can use the terminology and the criteria to be able to identify how that applies to people on teams. And if that happens to fit, well, then I've done my job of transmitting this information to your audience and your listeners. I had a wide receiver a number of years ago who kind of started giving up whenever his number wasn't called. And as it works out, he oftentimes, at that moment, he didn't put his mouth guard in. And this was picked up by the defensive coordinator of this team that they were playing. And so, as it works out, I showed him the video of the play in particular that took place. And it was a run play to the right, and it was through the 3-5 gap. And that means, for your audience, if they don't know, that means the guard is to block inward and the tackle is to block outward. They're the number 3 and the 5, and so it creates a gap. And the handoff goes to the running back, and the running back goes for 10 yards. Hey, you got to love that. 10 yards on football, first down. And he's tackled by the defensive back. And I asked this wide receiver, what was the play? And he tells me, and I said, what'd you think about it? He goes, we got a first down. I said, that's great, but who tackled him? And he said, this guy. And I said, who is that? And he said, that's the defensive back. And I go, why is he standing there? He's supposed to be almost 10 yards over covering you. But the team now knows that when your mouth guard is out, it's not a pass to you. It's a run or a pass to someone else. And so the guy cheated over. Yeah, it was 10 yards. Good, first down. Should have been a 60-yard touchdown. And I had to point out to him, you do realize you need the quarterback to throw you the ball. You need the linemen to keep the big guys off your quarterback. You need a good running back to keep the middle linebackers trustworthy and staying in and keeping into their location instead of playing out. You need everyone on the team in order to be successful. And it's so interesting how to work with these individuals to kind of take a step back from years of being praised on being the best physical specimen on whatever team they were.
And that's where sports are a microcosm of life, because there's an example of a narcissistic mindset hurting the team, much like being a narcissist can hurt your work culture or your family culture or just your own personal life, right? Whatever it is, I'm always fascinated by the way we can connect sports to the rest of our lives, because not all of us, and I know I'm speaking for myself and you and a lot of our listeners, not all of us are professional athletes, so we have to find ways to bring these lessons to our own lives. And our own lives, Dr. Shinitzky, is where I want to leave this podcast, because this is a self-help book, and I believe that we should end with that. So let's say I'm a listener and I'm a victim or a survivor of a narcissistic relationship, or I'm close to someone who is that. What do I do?
Well, first off, I'd like to tell people who are interested in getting into a relationship, do not fall in love with someone's potential. That may have nothing to do with the other person. So if you're going to fall in love with who the person is. In addition, we each need to identify what's acceptable for you in a relationship, what's unacceptable. And so we don't want you to minimize. You need to have standards of good sense of like trustworthy emotional management, being able to negotiate, compromise, communicate. Some individuals, because they have their own needs unresolved, they are willing to accept someone who violates those. So in the book, I talk about those as non-negotiables, things that are unacceptable. But I really want to emphasize to individuals that as you move forward, a bottom line is you have to have a good sense of self. The term in the book when we do an exercise is ego strength. Ego meaning identity in psychological terms. So really getting to know who you are, what your core values are, what your standards are, what your beliefs, your values are. If you can get a better sense of that, you'll be able to then accept people who have shared values and keep out unhealthy people, such as potentially a narcissist who could bring harm to you.
And remember, this is not just if you yourself are a victim survivor. This is if you know someone, right? We all have a responsibility in that. And yeah, I've learned a lot from listening to you, from reading the book. A key takeaway for me, and I know sometimes I'm kind of taking I'll ask you a question in the headspace of a casual, I know less, and of course you're the expert, you're the doctor. But I think a lot about the word narcissism like I do the word depression. That's way overused in society, right? Mm-hmm. People say, ugh, I'm so depressed today. Well, depression is something that is formally diagnosed. It's mm-hmm. not something you wake up and feel, and then you wake up and feel happy the next day, right? Mm-hmm. When someone says, I feel depressed today, what they really mean is I feel sad today, I feel off today, I feel sluggish today. It's overused. And I think narcissism is very similar in that way, right? We say, oh, that person's a narcissist. Well, they might just be a jerk, because there's a lot of jerks, and there's a lot of self-help manuals for that. But this is a self-help handbook for victims, survivors of a narcissist. Very specific thing, needs to be diagnosed, and I appreciate you taking the mature and, of course, professional point of view with not just saying, oh, athlete X, athlete Y, person X is a narcissist. That needs to be diagnosed by a professional like you. But this book, folks, is very helpful. And Dr. Shinitzky, you are always very helpful. And I appreciate you coming on for a third time. How much time you've spent with me. It's crazy.
It is my honor. I feel very, very fortunate to be able to have this platform, to be able to share this information to your listeners. The more people who get this information, the more I hope it helps individuals in their future.
Any little sneak peek? Any works coming up? You want to tease anything, or just leave it at that?
I am actually planning on working on a Champion's Mindset Part 2.
One of my favorites. That's when I first had you on, Champion's Mindset. A really different type of book, because this narcissism book, puts you in a different mindset, right? You're like, oh, narcissism. Like this, it's not fun to read about. Champion's Mindset, that makes you want to run through a brick wall. So feed me part two, and we will do Mental Game Podcast Part 4, okay?
I look forward to it.
The great Dr. Harold Shinitzky. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Awesome chat with Dr. Shinitzky. It doesn't matter what information you have if you can't communicate it. And Dr. Shinitzky is one of the best at it. That's why I love having him on the podcast, and also so much respect for him not taking my bait and naming names, going, hey, that guy, that woman, they are narcissists. He showed his patience. He showed his expertise, and that's why you should read all of his stuff and spread the word around. Speaking of that, I appreciate you listening to this podcast. If you liked it, drop a review, drop 5 stars if you really, really liked it. And make sure you share it with your friends. I really appreciate the support here on The Mental Game. This podcast exists for you, to bring smart people on, to teach you, to bring athletes on that you can relate to, and make sure we're all prioritizing our mental health. So on that note, I've been Sam Brief, your host of The Mental Game Podcast. Make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you take care of others, and I'll talk to you next time. It's an adios from Chicago.